Welcome to the Part 2 briefing, a chance for you to learn more about what comes next on the Sutton Trust Fulbright US programme. You've come a huge way since accepting your place on the programme, and we've been really proud and impressed of both the hard work that you've put into Part 1 so far, as well as the initial efforts and hard work that you put in just to getting to this point in your life, to getting onto the programme. Hopefully, you'll have found that your time on Part 1 so far has been a really valuable opportunity to learn more about higher education in the United States. And we hope that the support that you've already received so far will put you in a really strong position to make higher education decisions for both the US and the UK. We hope that the support that you'll have received so far, whether it's drafts with your practice application materials or anything else, will help you with your applications for the US, UK, or anywhere else. And we hope that you've built confidence and trust in yourself and your community and have begun to create a really strong established network through being on this program. So far on Part 1, we've been focused on exploring US universities, their application process, and everything that they might have to offer. We've learned about the liberal arts philosophy, different types of US universities, and of course, why fit is such an important part of the US process. We've dug into how the application works, including putting the building blocks of an application together through your summer Launchpad homework materials, and you've prepared for and sat the SAT exam. And of course, over the past week, you've had innumerable opportunities to visit virtually with US colleges and in person at the summer residential. This presentation now marks the end of Part 1 of the programme, the bit all about exploring US higher education. So we're going to be talking a bit about what comes next on the programme, and for those of you who might be considering continuing on into Part 2. As Part 1 comes to a close, there will be several different paths that are all available to everybody on the cohort. Some of you will decide that you want to apply to continue into Part 2 of the programme, which is about applying to US universities alongside applying to your UK universities. Others of you might have decided that all of this exploring is fun, but that you would actually like to focus on applying to UK universities because that's a better fit for you. You might be interested in taking some of the American flavour into your UK degree, perhaps through a year abroad or postgraduate studies in the US. And others of you might be interested in reassessing your options and want to think about a gap year. And those of you could consider applying to rejoin Part 2 next year alongside Cohort 16. All of these choices are absolutely valid and are great. As a program staff team, we support you to pick any one of these three options, and we hope that you've learned lots from the program along the way. We wanted Part 1 of the program to provide you with the resources and experiences to help you make informed decisions about going to university and the kind of person that you want to be. So whichever of these three options you decide is the right fit for you is absolutely fine for us. For those of you who are interested in applying to join Part 2, the first option, we're going to spend some time talking about what's involved and also the selection process so that you can make an informed decision about whether applying to Part 2 is a good fit for you. Before we dig into that, I want to give you a small overview of what is involved in Part 2. And maybe you're even wondering why we ask students to apply to continue with the programme at this point. Whereas Part 1 has been based around the idea of exploring university in the US and considering whether it's a right fit for you, this second part of the program is about actually applying to US universities with bespoke support from program staff. Getting admitted to a US university with the money that you will be asking for in terms of financial aid is incredibly competitive. These universities, even the ones that you perhaps hadn't heard of before coming onto the program, are some of the most competitive universities on the planet. And that's just in terms of getting admission. On top of that, getting a scholarship or financial aid in order to attend is especially competitive. Now, I hope that you know from working with many team leaders over your time on the program and witnessing perhaps people who have successfully come through your school or who you've seen around that this absolutely is possible, but we really want to be realistic with you. Being successful in US applications isn't something that will happen for everyone. And there will be people who put in all of the work, put in all of that hard work and time and energy and effort into their applications and come out the other end without an offer from a US university. And many of those students are just plain unlucky. It's just a testament to how unbelievably competitive this process is. Of the students on Part 2 in cohort 14, more than a third were not admitted to any US university. And that's not perhaps just their first choice university or their favourite, but any university. Some didn't listen to our advice as programme staff, and others really were just genuinely incredibly unlucky. That is part of the reason why we ask you to apply into Part 2 of the programme. The selection process helps us to give you feedback about what we think your chances of success are in the university application process. We'll dig into all of the parts of Part 2 application in a moment, but right now know that it is a huge amount of work and there are ultimately no guarantees that a US application would be successful. Therefore, we don't want to ask you to do all of that work if there isn't, in our opinion, a high enough chance of success. This program is a huge amount of work, and applying to US universities on top of UCAS applications and your final year at school is a lot to take on, and we don't want you to risk jeopardizing your final crucial year at school. So, with all of that said, who would be a good fit for Part 2, and should you put yourself forward for it? Now, first and foremost, the university choosing policy at the front of your university guide is the most robust source to consider who would be a good fit for Part 2. The university choosing policy is a document that program staff have put together over numerous years of the program, and it's a set of best practices and guidelines to help the individual and the whole cohort to find as much success as possible through their US applications. So if you go take a read through that, you'll walk away with a much deeper understanding of expectations going into Part 2 and who might be a good candidate to succeed in Part 2. A couple of points to highlight, though, is someone who's going to be willing to apply in the early decision round. And this is something that we're going to dig in a lot more deeply to in just a moment. As part of that, somebody who's a good fit for Part 2 is going to be someone who can be flexible, realistic, and strategic. And these are buzzwords that we will keep coming back to over the coming months. And that could range from thinking about being flexible, realistic, and strategic in terms of thinking about the types of universities that you'd like to apply to, or in terms of taking on board feedback from staff about a variety of things like your financial aid homework or any launchpad documents, or how much to value your SAT score, things like that. When it comes to program staff consideration of who should come into Part 2, we'll be looking at a whole range of factors. First and foremost, we will be paying attention to your academic progress so far. That will be things like AS results, mock exam scores, and predicted grades, as well as any official grades you have at this point, whether that is GCSEs, Highers, Nat 5s, etc. We know that many of you may have context around your predictions at this point. We know that many schools approach creating predictions in different ways, and if that's you, then that's okay. On the Part 2 application itself, we'll provide an area for you to share any additional information or context with us about how your school creates your grades or any additional information that you think would be relevant for us to know. The more information that you can provide, the better, and we will review your application in your own individual context. We'll also take into consideration your SAT score. Now, we know that many universities continue to be test optional, but having a strong SAT score for some universities, depending on which colleges you're interested in at this point, will help you to demonstrate your academic profile and match. We won't disadvantage you if you think that your SAT score isn't strong, or if you haven't taken it, or if you don't want to use it. But if you do have one that you are keen to use, having a strong score is an additional helpful data point. We'll also consider your commitment to the program so far. So how were you at meeting program assignment deadlines, including, but not exclusively, Launchpad? How were you able to cope with the homework load, and how did you communicate with program staff around those assignment deadlines? We'll also take into consideration your attitude and approach to the program, and that might be things like considering your behavior, both at in-person program residentials, at virtual program residentials, and outside of that, your support for your fellow students, the way you've taken on feedback, and the way that you've communicated with your peers on the program. Have you been respectful, kind, and inclusive? As part of the Part 2 application, we'll also ask you what you've learned through the program, and we'll try to test your understanding of it. The main way that we'll do this is by asking you to apply it to yourself. What do you want to get out of your education? Do you understand what we mean when we talk about finding your fit? Have you identified and been able to demonstrate why a particular university is a good fit for you? Remember, applying for Part 2 is a choice that not all of you will decide is right for you, and that is completely okay. From our perspective, you will always be a highly valued member of Cohort 15. You will always be a member of the Fulbright and Sutton Trust communities. And this is an experience that can go on your CV, on a resume, and on UK university applications as well. Through being a student on this program, you'll continue to have access to amazing resources from both institutions, from both organizations, notably amazing resources from the Sutton Trust, who will provide free and accessible university application resources for all students who are applying to UK universities. And through the Trust, access to an amazing network of people to help you get to where you want to be and achieve everything that we already know that you are capable of. So, what does the application look like? After the summer residential ends, the application to Part 2 will go live on the Google Classroom. There are two parts of this application. Firstly, everyone on the whole cohort, regardless of intent to apply to Part 2, will fill in the end of Part 1 survey. In this survey, you'll indicate your intention to apply to Part 2 or not. In here, we'll also ask you for things like your mock scores, your AS or highest grades, so you may need to wait until they're available on results day to submit your Part 2 application. We'll also ask additional questions that ask you to consider your participation in the program so far, from whether you've kept up with the homeworks to your reflections of what you've learned so far. Then, if you do want to apply to Part 2, you'll also need to complete an additional survey called the University Preferences Survey, in which you'll give us an early list of the colleges that you're interested in at this point. This list of universities is purely meant to be an initial indication of colleges that you might be interested in. It's not intended to be the final list of schools. In fact, the lists of universities that team leaders ended up applying to were very different to the colleges that they put on this initial university preferences survey, and there will be many opportunities for you to update your university interest list throughout the autumn if you do end up continuing into Part 2. However, this early list will allow us to assess how you have understood the concept of fit, your research so far, and how well you understand where you will be competitive. If you have any questions on anything that has been covered so far, I encourage you to pause this recording now and make a note of them. I also strongly encourage you to get in touch with us via email if you have questions so that we can do our best to answer them before or during the Part 2 selection process. Over the next few minutes, we're going to dig more deeply into early decision and why it's such an important component of Part 2. As you'll hopefully remember from previous residentials and everything you've learned on the program so far, early decision is quite a unique application process to the United States. In early decision, students would apply to one university, to their top university worldwide, even their top preferred institution over UK options. Now, if you apply early decision and are admitted, then that means that you are committing to attend because early decision is a binding contract between you and the university. The early in early decision comes from the fact that it has an earlier application deadline. The deadline is typically at the end of October or in early November. And it also means that you'll get an admissions decision earlier than you would in the regular round. So admissions decisions for the ED round come out before Christmas. And there's some pretty hefty benefits and perks involved in early decision. For example, it offers a significantly better admissions rate than applying in the regular round does, and an increased chance of being awarded that much needed financial aid. And this is for a few different reasons. First of all, it's highly appealing to the US university that you are prepared to make that binding commitment. And so, therefore, they feel more confident in your likelihood to attend. And so, they choose to offer you that much wanted admission. Likewise, particularly for universities that have a limited total pool of funding, the earlier you apply in the year, the more likely you are to be considered for a greater availability of funding. So we do see year on year on year that applying early decision is an immensely strategic choice. It's a really important one. As scary as it might sound, especially to our UK context where we don't really have an equivalent here, it can be a bit daunting. It might be a little bit intimidating, but the benefits can really, really pay off for you if going to a US university is your ultimate goal here. However, there is a small caveat to this, which is that there are a very, very small minority of universities in our uni guide where there is no strategic advantage to applying early. You can see that those universities are noted in your university guide. And so if you've come across any of those colleges so far and you'd like more information, feel free to get in touch with staff. Now, you might also have heard that some universities offer something called early action or restrictive early action, rather than or in addition to early decision. Our program treats these in exactly the same way as early decision, and if you want to join part 2, we'll ask you to sign a document where you commit to adhere to this and to the rest of the university choosing policy that again you can find at the front of your university guide. So we thought you might like some data about why early decision is so important. So we've prepared some graphs of admission data from recent cohorts. This pie chart on the left shows the breakdown between early decision acceptances and regular decision acceptances for cohort 13. As you can see here, these numbers are pretty stark. This pie chart shows that in grey, 46% of those from cohort 13 were ultimately not admitted in either round. 19% of the cohort was admitted in the regular round, whereas 35% of cohort 13 was admitted through early decision. So you can see immediately and obviously the impact that applying early decision has, as 35% is significantly greater than 19% in the regular round. If you're wondering if that's just cohort 13, here's another pie chart for you where you can see that again, the numbers are replicated very, very similarly to the previous cohort. Now, the figures you just saw on the previous slide contain percentages, but for those of you who are interested in the raw data and the raw numbers, what that actually looks like person by person for each cohort, this is what you can see on screen right now. And if you're sat there thinking, okay, well, this is just cohort 13 or this is just cohort 12, this data is nearly replicated across all of the cohorts that we've had in the past. If we wanted to, we could share very similar data with you about cohort 11, 10, 9, 8, and so on and so on. Year to year, the data and the results clearly show that applying early decision offers the best and highest chance of success in terms of being admitted to a US university. These graphs show a different set of data. The first graph on the left shows cohort 13 students who were ultimately admitted to US universities. The blue represents students who applied somewhere in the early decision round. They didn't necessarily get in early decision, but the process that they went through in that early period helped prepare them and helped them to maximize their chances of getting admitted. That means that of the 60 students who were ultimately admitted to a US university from cohort 13, 59 of them submitted an early decision application. In contrast, the small orange sliver shows students who were admitted to a US university, but who only applied in the regular round. Of those 60 students from cohort 13 who were admitted, only one of them only applied in the regular round. Now, the chart on the right, these are the 3 students who didn't apply anywhere early decision for a range of reasons, but did choose to apply in the regular round. As you can see here, only one of those 3 students was admitted. Early decision is a big commitment, and we really do want you to be sure about it. But if you are able to be ready and you're feeling confident and excited to make that commitment, because that commitment actually increases your chances of getting in, then it does represent a real strategic approach. I'm going to change tacts for a moment, and instead, I'm going to ask you if you know who this person is. You probably don't. That's okay. Next, I'm going to ask you if you know who this person is. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. This person might be a little bit more familiar to you. But this person is, of course, Serena Wiegmann, who's the manager of the English women's football team, aka the Lionesses, and coached them to win back-to-back Euros in 2022 and 2025, and coached them to the final of a World Cup in the middle of that. Now, she was there as part of the team, but she wasn't playing on the pitch. She was providing her team with strategy and additional thinking, helping to tweak the performance of each individual athlete on her team. So, who is that first person that we started out with? Well, that is a woman called Jane Figueroa. That is Tom Daley's coach. And Tom Daley is, of course, one of the UK's most successful and decorated Olympic divers. Jane, just like Serena with the Lionesses, works in partnership with Tom to help improve his performance and to help him achieve as best as he can. What I want to show through these photos to those of you who might be wondering, why is she suddenly talking about a sporting analogy? Well, we want this to be how you consider your relationship with the staff team over the coming months and into part 2. Just like these athletes, it's not all about going out there on game day and doing your best on the pitch, or it's not just about clicking submit on your final application in October. Instead, it's about all of the work and support that goes into that. These athletes aren't just going out there unprepared or unsupported. Instead, they work with a whole team of support staff, nutritionists, physiotherapists, coaches, analysts, to help them really engage with their skill and to maximize their potential. And that's how we want you to think about us as well. We're not here to be your teachers or your parents. We're not here to force you to do your homework or to do your chores. Instead, we remind you that you're here on this program because you've chosen to be and because you've seen the value that the program can offer you in exchange for your engagement with us. And so this idea of coaching, of having a coaching relationship, brings me onto one of the really key aspects of this program that perhaps we haven't touched on yet. One of the things that makes this program so special. When a student on our program applies to a US university, us, the members of the staff team, we help them present their best self to the university. And that comes in the form of helping you prepare your application, giving feedback on your application materials and documents in advance of you submitting them. But it also happens behind the scenes, where we're regularly talking to admissions officers about what they're looking for from a student applying from this program, and then feeding that advice into the advice that we are giving you, whether through the university guide or through the one-to-one conversations that we'll have in the autumn. That means that our advice is filled with insider information, and that's why we try to help students identify their best strategic fit. When you apply to a US university, what we'll do is pitch you to that university, advocating for you to be admitted and helping the admissions officers on campus to understand you, your context, and why you genuinely are the best fit for that school. Because our ability to pitch you, to brag about you, to advocate for you is partly founded on our professional reputation and the trust that the program has built over time with US universities and their representatives, it means that there's a really important layer of responsibility for you as well. If we go out on a limb and rely on our professional reputation to back you, to brag about you, and to advocate for you, then it's really important that you do follow through on any commitment that you've made. And so this again comes back to it being really, really important that you think carefully about whether part two is a good fit for you. And then if you are on part two, that you think really carefully about your university choices and about your applications as you get closer to submitting them. On this slide, I want to show you an analysis we did of cohort 13 students and their applications. I'm willing to bet that lots of you, when you started this program back in March and April, had friends and family say, "Oh, do you want to go to Harvard then?" And I'm sure for many of you at the time that the answer was probably yes, and you thought that this program was going to be an amazing gateway to get you to a school that you've heard of, like Harvard. But of course, since then, you now know that there are many more universities in the US than Harvard, and likely many of them are much more interesting to you at this point because you know that it's all about finding the best fit for you. Nevertheless, I want to show you a little bit about what happened with cohort 13 and why we don't suggest that you all just apply to the same couple of universities if what you want is to be successful in your admissions to the US. The data that I'm about to share with you will hopefully help you to understand how important it is not to waste your strategic early application on an incredibly competitive and statistically unrealistic ultra competitive university. So here you can see the names of several ultra competitive colleges. And in this first row at the top, we're going to look at the students from cohort 13 who applied in the early round to Harvard College. So 7 blue dots represent 7 students who submitted an early application to Harvard. And of those 7, it's just the singular yellow dot, this one student who was successful in their application to Harvard in the early round. Now let's look at the regular round, shall we? Here we have 14 blue dots to signify 14 applications to Harvard in the regular round from cohort 13, and of those, just 1 was admitted. All right, let's think about Yale. So 1 early applicant to Yale, and how many do you think were admitted? That is correct. So nobody was admitted to Yale in the early round. And again, let's look at the regular round applications to Yale from cohort 13. So that is 9 applicants to Yale in the regular round. And once again, nobody from cohort 13 was admitted to Yale in the regular round either. Okay, moving on to MIT. How many early applicants there? Well, actually, there were no early applicants to MIT from cohort 13 in the early round because they listened and they took on board the advice and the guidance from our program staff team that said that there was no strategic advantage to applying early to MIT in the early round. In fact, if somebody were to apply early to MIT, it would be a waste of that one strategic early decision opportunity because an early application to MIT carries no strategic advantage in terms of admission or financial aid. That said, there were still 3 applicants to MIT in the regular round, and of those, just the 1 was admitted. Now, what I will say about this applicant, this successful applicant to MIT, is that their application was incredibly strong, and they were the first student in many, many years of program history to be admitted to MIT. So something like this does not come around regularly. And if you're wondering how to link the information on this slide to the previous slides that we've just spoken about and the importance of making a really strategic early application to your US university, then I want you to consider what you will see here with these grey dots. These grey dots represent the students who were ultimately unsuccessful in their applications to the US. It's not that they didn't get into the colleges that you've seen here on screen. It's that they ultimately did not get admitted anywhere to any US universities. And some of them, yes, it was because they were unlucky. But for many of them, it's in part because they wasted their one early decision application on a ill-advised and unstrategic and unrealistic early ultra competitive university. And that's what we really, really want to encourage you to consider not doing if you'd like to maximize your chances of success in this process. Okay, let's look at some more universities, shall we? Maybe some of you have sat through the previous slide thinking, well, that's okay. I'm not interested in Harvard or Yale or MIT. But perhaps you have been interested in somewhere like Columbia or Penn or Stanford. So let's have a look at those stats as well. In terms of early applications to Columbia, there were 4 of them. And how many were admitted? That's right, 0 admitted students from cohort 13 to Columbia in the early round. In terms of regular decision, many, many more applicants this time. That is, I believe, 19 applicants to Columbia. And of those, just the 1 was admitted. Moving on to Penn, 4 early applicants. This time, just 1 of them was admitted as well. To the regular round, another 19 applicants here, and this time 2 of them were admitted. Now Stanford, 4 early applicants to Stanford in the early round. And again, you might remember from reading your university guide that Stanford is also not a recommended university to apply to in the early round because it does not offer a significant or even slim advantage in terms of admission or financial aid. So how many were admitted of these 4 to Stanford in the early round? None of them. They were all rejected from Stanford in the early round. In the regular round, 13 applicants to Stanford, and how many of them were admitted? Again, 0 people admitted to Stanford in the regular round from cohort 13. And just to show you again here, the value of this, the impact on their subsequent progress through their US applications, many, many of these students were ultimately unsuccessful. Okay, we've spent a while now looking at some data points, various graphs and figures. We've been looking at some nameless, faceless data. And instead, I think it would be helpful to share with you some real cases. Now, these people are informed by real previous cohort members from the program, but of course with their names changed and anonymized. But we shared this information with you to give you a genuine, honest sense of some applicants and some thought processes that we have worked with in the past. So on screen here, you can see Siri from cohort 10. Siri had amazing grades, a really, really strong academic profile, but she struggled to think more carefully about her fit. She identified early on that she was interested in liberal arts colleges and particularly historically women's colleges, but unfortunately she didn't listen to staff advice that Barnard was not a good early decision choice, primarily due to limited availability of financial aid that year. Instead, we really encouraged her to consider Wellesley for early decision, which she had already shared with us was on her list of contenders, particularly for the regular round. Unfortunately, she was declined at Barnard from the early round, and she lost the potential value of that ED advantage. And although she did apply to Wellesley in the regular round, she was waitlisted. And when program staff spoke with admissions officers at Wellesley, as we so often do to pitch you to advocate for you, they shared with me that they would have loved to have admitted Siri, but unfortunately at that point in the year, their financial aid had become too limited. They said that if she had had the power of an early decision choice behind her, of that binding commitment, and that increased availability of financial aid at that point in the year, then that could have really helped her. But unfortunately, by the time it came to the regular round, it was too late for her. I also want you to pay attention here to the other colleges and universities that she was declined from. She has a stellar set of GCSEs and A-level predictions, and yet even with those things, she was declined from all of these schools. Even if you are less familiar with some of these colleges, or you think that maybe they're not as world renowned, none of these colleges are easy to get into, even with a flawless academic profile like Siri's. Let's have another look at a person from cohort 10, this time Oscar. Oscar also had a super strong profile and was looking to study engineering, which meant from the start that his list of universities was going to be a little bit more limited to schools with engineering, which obviously is not offered by every single US university. Oscar also was navigating some parental and family pressure to apply to name brand universities, which didn't help his process either. But what was frustrating to me about working with Oscar was that the things he said he valued, a sense of community, laid back students, wasn't reflected in the places that he was applying to. So his sense of fit and match and his ability to properly articulate in an application why he thought a university was right for him just wasn't there. He was committed to applying early decision to the University of Pennsylvania, even though we'd recommended places like WashU and Rochester, and he had expressed interest in places like Lafayette. But unfortunately, ultimately, he was declined from the University of Pennsylvania. In the regular round, he was waitlisted at Lafayette, a college which we as program staff had identified as being a potentially good fit for him back in the early decision round based on some of what he was telling us about his interests and his values, but ultimately by that point it was too late. Next up, Harold. Again, another really strong profile. A slight dip in predictions here, especially compared to his peers on the cohort who were looking to apply to similar universities, and especially to Princeton, which is where Harold really wanted to apply. Harold had a real sense of what he considered prestigious in terms of a university, and this meant that he wasn't very open-minded about his choices. He put in a lot of hard work into those applications, but unfortunately, there was a fundamental mismatch between the types of colleges that Harold was going after and the college and what the colleges were looking for in return in terms of his academics on paper. Don't misunderstand. His predicted grades are still very, very strong, but purely in comparison to other students who were also applying to the same university, it made it harder for Harold to stand out in that application pool. And standing out in a specific application pool is exactly what you're looking to be doing. And finally, here's Tom from cohort 11. Tom was an academically strong student, you can see that, but he really focused on sitting the SAT over the summer and through September at the expense of his university research. When everybody else was coming into part two and was thinking about their sense of fit and thinking really carefully about how individual universities aligned with their fit, Tom was instead focused on resitting and getting a higher SAT score, which, as you can see, is already very strong. When he came into advising calls in part two, he said that he'd only had time to research one university, Stanford, and he liked it because, according to him, it was good for computer science and sunny. His research was so incredibly thin, it was very hard to understand what he was looking for and what he wanted to get out of his education at university. At the very last minute, just days before the early decision deadline, he switched to applying early decision to Dartmouth, where there were already a couple of US program students also applying. The other students were admitted, and he was waitlisted. And the admissions officer said to us, "He was really strong. We can see that on paper, but he just didn't demonstrate his sense of fit to us. From reading his application, it wasn't clear to us why he liked Dartmouth." And this goes to show that academics and test scores are always going to be so important when you're applying to a US university. But if you don't do the research and identify your fit, it can and will really hurt your chances of admission. I know these case studies may sound like daunting examples, but we do want you to find confidence in the success of all of the people who have come through this program before you. This program has supported over 750 young people from across the UK to go to American colleges and universities with huge and meaningful financial aid packages and scholarships. A common quality that most of these people have on screen, these folks from the last few cohorts who have headed off to the US to begin their 4-year undergraduate degrees, is their bravery, their open mindedness, not just to new experiences across the pond, but to considering colleges or opportunities that they hadn't before, and their willingness to participate as part of a cohort and to work with the staff team to achieve their goals. These are the folks and these are the images that I want you to strive towards and reflect on as you head into the next phase of the program. So we've spent some time discussing part two, what it involves, the selection process, and various things to consider if you do choose to continue into part two in the autumn. But many of you might be already realizing that the UK is a good fit for you. And perhaps you do want to continue to keep a flavour of the US or of internationalism in your degree. And so here are some things that you might consider. Firstly, a liberal arts degree here in the UK. As you'll hopefully have seen from exploring the back pages of your university guide, a growing number of institutions in the UK have started to offer liberal arts degrees. They offer a similar level of flexibility to what you might encounter in a US degree program, albeit with a bit of a UK spin, since it is still sitting within the UK university system. One of the really big differences here, it tends to be that you declare your major in your first year, but it does change from university to university here in the UK. But if you're looking for that kind of flexibility, that interdisciplinary degree here in the UK, liberal arts degrees are a really worthwhile thing to look into. Second of all, consider a year or a semester abroad from your UK university, which is a great way to consider experiencing higher education around the world while still being rooted at a home university in the UK. You would still be a member of your UK university, so you wouldn't have to pay US fees, and your student loan from the UK would still be applicable. Next up, American Studies. American Studies is a great degree program to consider if you've enjoyed your time on the program so far, but perhaps want to experience learning more about the US or the Americas from an intellectual or academic perspective, rather than feeling the need to be situated in the US for all 4 years. American Studies combines the interdisciplinary nature and intellectual curiosity that draws many people to US higher education with a passion for learning more about the US and the Americas. And that's not just the United States, but other areas of North and South and Central America as well. So, very interesting and highly interdisciplinary, drawing on history, literature, film, art history, languages, and more. Because of the dynamic nature of this degree, a year abroad is often an important built-in part of these programs and can often be combined with other degrees for a joint honours degree. And finally, consider postgraduate study in the United States. As with undergraduate choices, there are far more universities that offer postgraduate degrees in the US than there are in the UK. So the chances are that if there's something that you're interested in, a particular academic niche or specialism, you'll likely find opportunities for you in the US. Generally speaking, master's degrees are much less common on their own in the US than they are in the UK. And instead, what is very common is to embark on a PhD, which in the US is normally around 6 or 7 years, which often has an integrated master's, meaning that you'll walk away with a combined master's and PhD after completing that full degree. Postgraduate programs in the US aren't as pure research focused as they can be here in the UK. You would be expected to complete coursework and earn credits just like you would with an undergraduate program. So if that element of classroom engagement and professor connection really appeals to you about the undergraduate system, but you're just not ready to take that leap yet, then the likelihood is if you explore postgraduate opportunities in the US, you'll be able to tap into something similar. Just as with the undergraduate process in the US, Securing funding or financial aid is really, really important at the graduate level, and funding can come in the form of fellowships and stipends as well as scholarships. Hopefully, many of you know that one of the things that the US UK Fulbright Commission or the Global Fulbright Commission is most well known for is supporting people to secure funding and scholarships to go and study at a US university for a postgraduate degree. As you know, the Sutton Trust Fulbright US program is delivered in conjunction between the Sutton Trust and the Fulbright Commission here in London. So, if studying in the US at the postgraduate level is something that you continue to be interested in, then you can definitely get back in touch with the Fulbright Commission or scope out our website, as there will be many helpful resources for you to consider there. Finally, I encourage you to, at this point, pull up simultaneously the Part 2 timeline, which you'll also find on the Google Classroom. I encourage you to, on your own time, read through the Part 2 timeline in detail to get a sense of an in-depth overview of Part 2 and the kinds of things you'll be doing. As you can see from this timeline, Part 2 really is a huge amount of work, and so we want you to think really carefully about your workload in the autumn and the winter, your time, your commitments and responsibilities to other things in your life, and whether or not Part 2 or applying to US universities is the right choice for you this year. As you may be beginning to understand from the timeline and from this presentation, there is a huge amount of work that goes into Part 2, and we know that proceeding into Part 2 might not be for everyone. We ask that you spend the next couple of weeks reflecting on your participation in Part 1 and assessing whether pursuing Part 2 is actually what you want and whether it is your fit. As always, myself and the rest of the staff team would be happy to talk with you to assess your options going forward, and you can find us at suttontrust@fulbright.org.uk. In the meantime, best of luck working on your Part 2 application, and I do encourage you, if you are interested, if you are at all interested in Part 2 at this point, to at least begin preparing your application, and we'll work with you to answer your questions. Until then, best wishes, best of luck. We hope you've enjoyed the summer residential, and we'll see you soon.